So welcome to the first in a series around OpenShift, sponsored by Red Hat and Crossvale. We really appreciate you giving up 45 minutes of your day today. But if OpenShift is something you're serious about, then we trust that it's going to be time really well spent. My name is Mike O'Boyle, and I look after the EMEA region for Crossvale. And joining me today is also Brett Kugler, who is our OpenShift principal architect. So let us, without further ado, and I can see you all coming and joining in, but let's go through and just to quickly summarize what you're going to be seeing today and what your expectations will be. So the presentation will be about 35 to 40 minutes, and hopefully that'll leave a few minutes at the end to answer your questions. And to that end, you're all currently on mute, but there is a Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen, and you may ask or type any questions you like throughout the webinar, and we can answer them either towards the end of this event, or if it's quite specific to your company, then we can come to you after this event and we can actually address those questions. And we'd very much like to take that opportunity to do so. So just a few sort of housekeeping elements. The meeting is being recorded. The on-demand will be made available within 48 hours of this webinar, and I'll be emailing out to you that webinar on demand, and you can share that amongst your friends and colleagues, please, and we'll welcome that you do that. We'll also make it available on YouTube for you to go through all of the other on-demand videos that we have on these webinars. So today, and as you can see going through the agenda, the goal of today's webinar is to demonstrate the simplicity of OpenShift installation, and that's what you'll see today first by Brett. But then critically to highlight that this does not mean it's then ready to hand over to the dev teams to go off and enjoy ad infinitum just yet. In fact, to ensure you have an enterprise-ready environment, there's a significant amount of process controls that need to be understood and put in place. And what we will do is go through this by looking at how Crossvale looks after our customers, OpenShift customers, clusters, in their environments. And we'll come to that as we go through this webinar. Now, if you wish to learn more about fundamentals of OpenShift, then reach out to us after this webinar, and we'll be only too pleased to send out that information and put you to some really excellent on-demand webinars. And in fact, Red Hat themselves just did a webinar yesterday on OpenShift 4, so that would be June the 9th, if you search for that on the Red Hat website. And that was really an excellent one to give you a great baseline fundamentals. But what we're going to be looking at really here today is focusing on where does it go next? And that's what it is, life after install. But first, if we may, just for a minute, just who is Crossvale? Well, very importantly, we are an Apex Red Hat partner. And this year, we were really proud to win the Leading Edge Award. We also the Application Platform Partner of the Year prior to that for 2 years running. We're a preferred Red Hat services partner for companies like Tech Data across EMEA, IBM, Dell, and not least Red Hat themselves. Now, for 20 years, we've been helping our clients get more out of their enterprise applications and platforms. And we focus really on everything from what we call, and I'm sure you've come across it more and more today, of day zero, which is the build and enablement, to day one, the development of solutions, and then finally day two, operations and maintenance. And that kind of is the segue into today, because today is really all about, I've got my subscription of OpenShift, I've even potentially installed it, I've deployed it, be it on a dev or a production cluster even perhaps. Am I ready? What really should I now be looking at? And so what we want to do is, as I say, there are other decks you can go to learn more of the fundamentals, but let's just take that sort of 20,000 foot view of things. What we know is it's built on that enterprise Kubernetes platform, and we come to the Red Hat OpenShift because of the trusted environment that Red Hat delivers. We also get this lovely phrase, which is cloud-like experience. Whether it's bare metal, whether it's VM, whether it's a private cloud, whether it's a hybrid multi-tenant, the experience is the same everywhere and anywhere. And that's what you really get from OpenShift particularly. And what that does, as it passes along the DevOps chain, is it comes to the empowerment for the developers. And that brings us back to the very original point I made. This is about, can you hand it then to the developers? And on that note, what I would like to do is bring in someone who has spent too many years doing OpenShift and everything that came before it, Mr. Brett Kugler. So Brett, if you would very kindly take that away for me and explain it far better.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. Okay, let's kind of get started. So OpenShift 4 released actually right around 12 months ago. And it was a kind of a sea change in the way OpenShift is installed, managed, and worked with day to day. So, you know, if you guys have previous OpenShift experience with OpenShift 3, maybe you've dabbled with 4, but we're going to highlight some of the kind of the new features in 4 just really quickly. We're going to have some continuing webinar series that will dive more in depth into a lot of these different kind of features that Red Hat has added to OpenShift 4. But just very quickly, operators are now a key component within OpenShift, and these are specialized pieces of code that help you manage, maintain, and install components of the platform. On the developer side, we have new features such as service mesh and serverless, and things like even now being able to launch your VM stacks into OpenShift through KubeVirt, right? And so those are kind of features that are really bleeding edge as far as the OpenShift platform is concerned. And of course, there's a continuing and growing list of other features that are being rolled into the platform. Today, we'll talk pretty heavily about monitoring and kind of how you kind of look at what's going on in your cluster. But first, let's talk a little bit more about the operators. So again, the operators are a core concept, and you'll see real briefly when we spin up a cluster here in just a few minutes that the operators will kind of be everything that's running on the cluster, and there will be a lot of them, right? So Red Hat's philosophy is really now to bring in operators to help manage and install and operate every little piece of the cluster. And again, this is trying to leverage a little more power, a little more versatility for the operators. And then, as I said, you know, some of the most exciting new features from the developing side of the house for OpenShift 4, things like service mesh, being able to get a good look at what's going on in your microservices architecture, who gets to talk to who, how traffic is flowing through those patterns, being able to alert on issues, being able to throttle, being able to rate, those types of things. Service mesh is a very powerful tool for any microservices architecture. Stepping beyond that, we also have the capability through Knative now to do serverless application processing as well on top of OpenShift. And this is interesting because normally we see serverless in the public cloud, right? And this cloud-like experience, as Mike pointed out earlier, is really nice to now be able to do that on-prem or wherever you're running your OpenShift cluster. Now, some of the advantages to serverless on OpenShift are that you're not necessarily gated or restricted to the public cloud providers' rules for using their serverless functions, right? So there's a lot of advantage to being able to do this on your own. So right from the get-go, one of the big improvements that Red Hat has built into OpenShift 4 over 3 is the install process. And in 3, and even today in 4, we can still have kind of this separation of operating system and cluster. And the operating system traditionally has been RHEL, but now with OpenShift 4, we are transitioning to CoreOS. So in the kind of the true lockstep idea behind OpenShift 4, we treat the operating system and the platform, the cluster itself, as one common entity, right? And this allows us to really keep everything in sync, in lockstep. We can patch at the same time both the operating system and the cluster. In fact, we've gotten to the point now where Red Hat is revving the versions of CoreOS and the versions of OpenShift at the same time So they will always have the same version moving forward. Let's take a look at an install and see what this looks like. Now, this usually takes about 35 minutes, so we've abbreviated this a little bit. But the thing to keep in mind here is there's multiple ways to install OpenShift. And this is the absolute simplest way that you can possibly do it. This is called an installer provided infrastructure, so an IPI install. And essentially what we're going to do is we're just going to run through and do an OpenShift install using the OpenShift installer. This is a binary. We're going to ask it to create a cluster. We're going to tell it where to put all of its artifacts. And then we're going to hit enter. And it's going to prompt us for a series of information, an SSH key to help us manage our cluster nodes. So we'll provide that. The platform we're trying to deploy to, we're going to deploy to AWS. So it knows we need to go pick a region. Then we got to give it a base domain. So this is kind of our top level TLD for where the cluster is going to be deployed at. And then a cluster name that gets appended to that URL so that we can kind of get our final URL for the solution. Then we go to Red Hat or cloud.redhat.com. We request our pull secret from Red Hat. This is how we sync back to the telemetry in Red Hat Cloud that they are now using to help us manage and monitor our clusters. So we just drop that pull secret in there. And then we're off to the races, right? So that's it. That's as easy as it gets, right? And essentially what's going to happen now is the installer is going to go out to AWS, provision all of our hardware, all of the nodes that go along with the cluster. So in this case, it'll be 3 master nodes and 3 worker nodes. The first thing that happens is the bootstrap node comes up. The bootstrap node kind of kicks everything off. And once its API is exposed, this can take a little bit. Obviously, we've shortened this for the purpose of this webinar. But once the bootstrap comes up, then we start doing things like downloading all of the software from Red Hat. CRI O is where all of the OpenShift backbone software lives. Once we've downloaded that, then we start to actually install OpenShift. And again, when I say we, in this case, it's the installer doing all the heavy lifting for us. So it's installing all of the software on all of the nodes, making sure that they all come up and can talk to each other. And then we're done, right? So that is pretty much the simplest way to install OpenShift 4. Now we're going to go look at the console real quick so we can show you that the cluster is actually running. And what you'll see here is that, let me just get in here real quick. First thing you'll see is that we are using self-signed certificates. Okay, so from an operations perspective, that's kind of step one. If we want to harden our clusters, so that's going to be a secondary task. Again, through the OAuth process. Now we'll log in, or we'll log in when we use the right password. All right, so here we are in the OpenShift UI. And you'll see, if you're familiar with OpenShift 3, this looks kind of different. We'll take a quick look at the monitoring here, just so you can kind of get a sense of all the things that are kind of already built in to OpenShift 4 with the addition of Prometheus and Grafana. So you can select, kind of the cluster overview here, and you can get a kind of deep dive into what's going on from a resource perspective inside of your cluster. We're looking at the number of cores being consumed, the memory being consumed, things like the nodes and how heavy they're being utilized, bandwidth, and obviously, in addition to just seeing these pretty graphs, there's alerting, there's thresholds, there's all of these things that you can now manage your cluster with easier and set up alerting and that sort of thing. So I mentioned all those operators, right? So by default, this long list here are all project namespaces within OpenShift 4 that are mostly dedicated to running the cluster itself via the operators, right? So there's a lot more going on behind the scenes now than there used to be in OpenShift 3. So great. We have now completed a OpenShift 4 install. Now, the thing to remember is we are simply at the beginning of our life cycle for OpenShift. And there's a lot more that really has to occur. What I just showed you, that quick AWS install, we do for 0% of our clients. Everyone has specific needs, specific tailoring. Even if they're going to public cloud, there are going to be times where that you need to make changes to kind of fit your environment. So while extremely handy, it's not a very realistic deployment. But let's say you're happy. You've got kind of where you want to be, and the devs are saying, hey, we want access, we want access. So let's say, okay, we'll give you guys access, right? So here come our users, and I apologize, this is a little small, and my old eyes have to kind of squint at this a little bit. But we kind of have some left and right action going on here. So on the right, we're looking at kind of the nodes and what their state is. And now the devs are going to say, okay, I want an Apache server. So they're going to say, okay, we'll go out here, we'll spin up an Apache image and see what the cluster can do for us, right? So over here, we can see on the left, we're kind of doing your standard build, deploy, run of an image inside of OpenShift, right? And the objective here is to get it running and then just test to see if it's going to respond, make sure the cluster is running and all of that, right? So we'll give it just a second here to kind of spin up. Again, this is a first-time deployment, right? So it actually has to go out to redhat.com and download the Apache image first before it can actually do the deploy or the build and deploy. All right, so we're good, we're running. And now the dev says, I want to scale this. I want a highly distributed application. Well, they have the brilliant idea of requesting 1,000 pods. And OpenShift says, okay, sure. And over here on the left, we can see all of the pods that are now trying to spin up. Well, what do you think this is going to do to our environment? This is going to be very difficult on OpenShift once all of these pods start running. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you here real quick that there are responses. It's still responding. We're getting 200 back from our service, so that's great. However, as more and more of these pods start coming online, it's going to eat more and more of the cluster resources. And what's going to end up happening is ultimately we're going to kill our cluster. Essentially, the workers will become unresponsive and we won't be able to work with anything inside the cluster anymore. So we're going to kind of keep an eye on our nodes here and kind of watch that transition happen. And over on the left, you'll see a lot of these container creatings and pendings start turning into running nodes, or pods, excuse me. And once those pods start kicking off, you'll see that, just a second, our nodes will start going into not ready state. And 3, 2, 1, there we go. So, and now it happens pretty quickly, right? These pods, they take a little bit to spin up, and then as soon as they do, bang, 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 we're running out of resources. And all of our pods are now no longer, our nodes are no longer responsive. So if we go back and we try to hit our service, you'll see now that we're getting 503s, right? So we are totally unresponsive, and the cluster is done, right? Cooked. So what do we do to prevent this? So what's actually going on here is we've essentially DDoSed our cluster, right? OpenShift says, okay, you've asked me to do something. I'm gonna do everything I can to give you that service that you've requested, right? Well, if you're an OpenShift 3 operator already, you know that this is a really bad idea, and you really want to kind of gate your developers. You want to set up quotas and resource limits and all of those types of things. That's a very standard type operation for managing your cluster. And you can limit just about anything you want: compute, memory, disk, number of pods that can be run inside a project, et cetera, et cetera. And we do this all the time as deliverers and enablers of OpenShift, right? This is one of those things that is kind of day one operations, right? Along with setting up infonodes and that sort of thing. We'll talk about some more examples. All right, so let's take a quick look on how we fix this, right? What you'll see now is a pared down version of that same demo, but what we're going to do first is we're going to go over to our Chaos Dev namespace. We're going to apply this label to it, right? And if you're familiar again with OpenShift 3 and how you do resource management, this is going to look a little different. And I'm going to kind of walk you through what's going on here. But all we're really doing is slapping a label on that project namespace. And we're going to use these resource quota objects. I'll show you one here. It's just a YAML list. And this particular one is called small size. And so we've defined what a small size project looks like from a resource quota perspective, right? Now we have an operator running, and we'll talk about that at the end of the demo, that magically combines that small label with that small size resource quota, right? So we're going to go through the same steps. The only thing we've changed is applying that label to the project namespace, right? Build happens, deploy happens, application is running, and then in here you can see we have this resource quota. This is a quick topology overview. You can just see that the pod is up and running, and we're off to the races. So now let's go back to our 1,000 replicas, hit enter, and OpenShift says, okay. But notice on the left-hand side what's actually happened. It's created a lot fewer pods because it's again trying to fulfill our request as best as it can, but is now limited by the quotas that we've put in place, right? So automatically with a simple label addition, you are now no longer allowing your devs to DDoS your cluster, right? Obviously the service is responding. So that's a nice little demo, but what actually happened there? Went too far? All right, so let's talk about the namespace config operator. This is an operator that's provided by the Red Hat community of practice, and it is able to basically gate projects simply, and it allows you to set up resource quotas and limits much more simply than you used to be able to. There used to be a lot of fiddly command line, OC this and OC that to get everything set up properly. Now you just need a namespace config resource. You spell out what you want. Again, if I can point out here, we have this resource quota called small size that kind of defines this. And then we have a label to match called small. Now remember I said we labeled our project namespace small. This operator, which is running on the cluster, saw that and automatically applied this resource quota to that namespace, and problem solved. All right, so great. That was one example of additional maintenance operations that you need to do after installing your cluster. And as you can see here, the list kind of goes on and on and on. So just because the first time you've installed your cluster seems to work great, keep in mind there's a lot of things that you have to do for day one and day two operations to really make this a functional cluster. So if you want to get a better look at what your cluster is doing, you might be familiar with Prometheus and Grafana, right? And you can now in OpenShift 4 rely on the Grafana operator, or the monitoring operator really, to keep your monitoring stack running, your alerting working, all of that. And out of the box, you get some pretty nice visuals from what they provide. Now, the interesting thing is the things that you can create post-install to really get you dialed into the things you want to look at on your cluster. So here's a good example of a kind of customized perspective of a Grafana dashboard, right? And we can see alerts in here, events popping up. We have all sorts of different metrics and services that we're looking at. So there's a lot of cool customization that you can now bring into your dashboard. And this is always something fun to throw up on the big monitors around your service center, right? So again, this is powered by an operator, and that operator does things like keeps all the versions updated, makes sure that there's no config drift. There's all sorts of cool things that these operators can do for you and your operations team or your service provider. And with that, Mike, I'm going to throw it back over to you.
I appreciate that an awful lot, Brett. Thank you very much for that. That really was a brilliant insight just into, especially I think around the Grafana Prometheus and the customization that really you have to start, you can get right into. So at one level, it's brought to you with OpenShift 4, but that customization means you got to get your hands in there, get your hands dirty, and that's when you start really making this OpenShift work for you at an enterprise level, right, Brett? That's the point I think you've been bringing out there extremely well. So I thank you for that. So let me just go on a little bit then, and please stay with us a little bit longer. I appreciate some of the questions, and I know some of those I'm going to be taking on a one-to-one. We'll reach out to you after this. But I want to take a few minutes, and truly only a few minutes, to go into a bit of a point I brought up at the beginning, which is around Crossvale and the fact that we actually have a managed service that we offer out to our customers globally. And I want to just touch on that a little bit. The key thing that really comes down to when you're looking after a managed service is that you'll have seen that the demo that Brett was doing there and running through, which yes, was recorded, it was shortened down to 5 minutes rather than 35 minutes, 40 minutes it takes, was done in the Red Hat cluster environment. So it was up in the cloud. But that's not typically where you are. You are often, as I said at the beginning, a mixed multi-tenant. In some banking environments, you're completely locked down. You could even be, as recently we did a deployment, you're just on bare metal. And that's because that's where you want to be on your greenfield environment. The point here is it's all about your environment. And what Crossvale does is we come in and we work with you, we mentor you. It's more around advocacy rather than instructing this is how you want to do it. And what we do is we try to truly empower you, and not just empower the dev team, which would seem a very obvious area, but truly empower the operational team to be able to understand and appreciate that this environment now is truly ready for enterprise. That, as a result, brings those classic statements as in faster time to value. It really does. You're able to get there to day 2 rapidly by bringing in a managed services team that looks after your OpenShift, because this is looked after by our teams here, and there are local teams in EMEA and the US that actually every single day of their lives do nothing but OpenShift, and they are experts at it. As a result, we're able to bring 4.9's SLA on a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week support program. And what it really allows is, Brett touched on it on that one slide just before I jumped off here, is look at the plethora of environments that you really need to be looking at. We would love to go into every single one of those and actually explore that. And I'll come to that in a minute about what we're doing next. But we just picked one just to show you what you really need to do and the fact that you don't just sort of touch and go. And that's really what it comes down to. And from a pricing perspective, it's also extremely flexible because we run on a consumption-based pricing model as well. So as you use it, and depending on your business, there are all sorts of different types of businesses that have peaks and troughs, then the pricing peaks and troughs with it. And that can really then fit with your budget throughout the year. So what are we doing next? Today was really only around about a little being the operative word here, a little look around life after install, life after this automation that we've been seeing, and you're starting to dip your toe into realizing there's an awful lot more to do. What we'd like to do in the next and the remaining series here is take a look into 3 key areas. The first of which is operators. Brett touched on operators. He looked at how, ultimately an operator is something that automates that third-party link. We just looked at the Grafana with the UI Grafana and the Prometheus at the back end, and we showed you where you can customize that. What we want to do next is really take a deeper dive into some very, very cool operators and what they really can do for your business to fast track your business. So we'll take a look into that on the next one. Then we get into this extremely key area of CI/CD. CI/CD itself is that trunk between dev and ops, and it allows automation, but we can automate the automated. And that's where really you can start shifting gear now with OpenShift 4. And so we're going to touch on that and sort of start opening that up about what you can really do with CI/CD to really start to take your hands away. Because there's no point in saying you're doing DevOps unless you let the automation do its job. So we're going to touch on that. And then not finally, but the next one we're going to do, which is really on the tip of everyone's tongue at the moment, is Service Mesh. The upstream called Istio, the hardened version by Red Hat is Service Mesh. And this is really where you've gone from your litho and you're starting to say, can we break it up? Should we refactor it? Should we look at microservices? And the moment you do, then suddenly you have to start looking at the security of that architecture around those microservices. And this can be very delicate. This is areas that we've touched on, just the deployment of the platform. Now with Service Mesh, you really have to get extremely granular around the security of the microservices as they're being shared out. Bring in something like an API and open up to a gateway to the world, and then you're really potentially exposing yourself. And Brett, I know you work on many of these things day in, day out, so it'd be great to get your insights about how these things are going to work. So that's what's going to be coming next. But the show ain't over yet. You always say, you know, there's no free meal and things like this. Well, you've given your time today, and we seriously appreciate it. And we're going to give you something back. And we're going to give it back right now as we come out of this short webinar. And that is that after this webinar, I'll be sending out, so it'll be coming from my personal email, I'll be sending out an email with an invite for you to register for a free assessment of your cluster. Now, everyone sort of thinks the word free means that it's something cheap and, you know, we're just throwing it out there for nothing. It certainly isn't. It's worth several thousands. It's a significant amount of work that we've done. We've created automated scripts, which means it's very little time that you have to give up, but we giving back a 170-point detailed report about your current cluster. No strings attached. That's what we're going to deliver. You just fill in the details. The staff will be in touch with you. We'll set up an appointment. It's all done remotely, which is great for the time that we're currently in. And it's all very, very quick. It's less than half a day of your time. And we just come in, create that report, get it back to you. And how can you lose? From that, you could make a whole lot of modifications yourself. But of course, what we'd like to do is talk more about what we could then actually do for you as a business. So that's our give back to you. That's our sort of our prezi for the day from this particular one. And you can actually, obviously, we'll be sending out the recording. We'll be sending out notes to you, so you don't have to make a note of this URL that's here for our managed services page. The questions that I've got here, I'm going to move on. The questions that I've got, they've been asked to not ask them outright. One of them I've just tackled because I've said one of the questions was how long would it actually take to do that? So it is actually less than half a day to do a detailed report. So, but otherwise, I'm going to take those other questions and I'm going to take them on a one-to-one with you guys. You know who you are. So I'll do that. And what I'll do is leave you with this. Of course, again, it's a thank you for attending. Giving up 45 minutes of your day today. It's so busy and you're hectic trying to juggle. You've probably never been in more webinars and Zoom rooms in your life over the last 3 months, right? I think we all know what it's like. So we do appreciate that. As I say, we are giving back that assessment, so please avail of that. I think you'll really benefit from it. I think it'll be fantastic. I look forward to talking with you. I love to get Brett and all his team involved all around your clusters. I think that'll be great. But all I'd ask, the last little thing I'd ask as we close this out in a few minutes, is that as we close the webinar, there'll be a short survey, terribly short. It's really for us. This isn't about you now, it's actually about us. It's just for us to learn, for us to improve, for us to move it forward, to change things, bring in new things. What would you like? Different speakers. Do you want Brett not to wear the hat next time? You know, what do you want? Just that's all. So just take that little survey, would you? And fill out the details. It means so much to us. It's not being handed out to anybody else. It's not going into some third-party marketing program, okay? This is me, it's Michael Boyle, you know, and I'll be contacting you. So don't be blocking our emails. It's just me reaching out. And I'll just be sending out, just so you know, you'll get that assessment. I will go out with a recording in 48 hours, so you can share that, as I said at the beginning. Also, I'll go out with just some little things like just a summary brief. What were we trying to get over today? What were the main takeaways for today? I think that's always a good thing to come away with. OpenShift itself is very, very easy to learn. It's very easy to install. It's all automated. However, number two, there are many things under the cover that you need to know about if you want to go to production-ready enterprise. And number three, and probably most importantly, there is a company with a history and a knowledge of OpenShift, which is in our day and age, that can actually come and do this for you. It can be through managed service, but it could just be about getting your mentorship of day 0 to day 2. And we're here for you no matter where you are in that journey. So that is where I'll leave you today. So from myself and from a good friend, Brett, I thank you greatly for taking the time, and we'll be in touch about the next one in the series, and I'll talk to you all then. So thank you very much for joining. Goodbye.